He caught polio at 5, and he was in the hospital the first 2 years of his life. So my dad took him home, and with a generator because they said he wasn't going to live. So my dad got a truck and went down there, and they said, you can take him home to die in the living room. My dad said, well, we'll see about that. Paul painted this Indian. Really proud of that. He wouldn't have been able to live at all without the iron lung because, again, if he could use another type of ventilator, it would go over his face. And what he did was besides the breathing aspect of the iron lung has a table that his head lies on, and he taught himself at an early age to paint, actually, by numbers to start with, and he actually has some pretty good paintings, paints better than I do. But then later on, we have a plastic stick, and it has a pin on the end, and he uses his mouth, and that he even taught himself to do the keyboard, with that stick. It's a paint by numbers, but still, he did that with his mouth. So, iron lung, that's the only place he could sleep. And because regular ventilators, they don't work for Paul. He needs more pressure than that. So really the iron lung is the only thing that can give him enough pressure to breathe. So, but when he was younger, up until about 10 years ago, he could get out and he loved to lay in the sun. But these last 10 years have been really rough on him because his body started failing, and soon he can only get out about 30 minutes because he gulps air with his throat. So he uses his throat muscles to force air down in his lungs. I bet you where I know what's on there rather than looking through my phone. That's his place of life. I mean, he ate there most of the time. He worked there, and obviously he slept there. So his iron lung is his home. He got depressed, just like all of us do. I don't see where he actually got more depressed than just the average normal person, to be honest with you. I mean, he would bounce back the next day, so I think that's one thing that he taught me is, hey, crap's going to happen, man. So, just, deal with it and, be depressed. It's okay. And then wham, the next day, hey, we got to do this today or do that. So, he was maybe had a little extra strength than most of us because, he had to think of innovative ways to have fun. Paul's life hadn't been easy from the start. Luckily our home environment was really caring and loving and secure. But after Paul went out on his own, he had to get people for everything, and he just to push him around the classes, and I guess people gravitated to him then. And he made it through school. I guess he stayed in Austin a few more years, and then came back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to practice law. There's a really good picture. There were people who wouldn't go into the room, because Paul was in there. They didn't know that. It was such an ordeal. I mean, here you got this big yellow tube that takes up almost the whole room, and you got this head sticking out. So, I mean, that would pretty much startle anybody. But depending on their personality, you had people, again, scared not to go in. Then you had people very, timid, walking up, and, then people would just go in and talk. But Paul always made people feel comfortable. We both had hair about then. He looks like he was starting to lose his already. This week, since he passed, so many people have reached out. And, there's that group of people who have some kind of disability that Paul is a role model for, But there's a whole lot of people admire him that just don't have any major disabilities. And so I've been thinking about what attracts to them. And I think deep down it's that they look at Paul and they see how difficult his life had to have been. First of all, just to stay in that tube most of the time, nobody could, I don't know anybody else that could do that first, and then to accomplish everything he had accomplished with such huge limitations. That was kind of my, what do you call it, my task, to feed Paul, at the Thanksgiving and Christmas.